more than 1,100 homes have been destroyed in the worst wildfires to hit the country in a decade.
More than 20,000 people have been displaced by flooding.
2023 was the hottest year on record.
The future definitely scares me. We're pushing to go infinitely higher, faster, further. And this is why we're here, with a looming climate catastrophe that's coming ever closer, taking humanity into a new age of hot temperatures.
There are people who spread a sense of panic, and worse, in my view. They immediately offer a solution and say that this is our only hope. I think if we preach a culture of less, we'll lose people's acceptance.
I'm seeing the effects of climate change with my own eyes. There are droughts everywhere. And we can feel the Earth getting progressively warmer. We're also observing a rise in sea levels.
The way I'm personally feeling climate change is that it's unusually hot at the moment. Who's doing more damage, us or them? But we're the ones suffering the most as a consequence.
Who's to blame for climate change? Who should be fighting it? Are the dangers being over-exaggerated? Or is it simply unstoppable?
I'm Anja Windel. I'm 26 and from Germany. I engage in civil resistance in the face of total political failure in response to the climate catastrophe. We all need to realize that we're in a state of emergency and we need to act accordingly.
Won't you please stand up? I have to go to work. I have to earn money and not sit around like you all here.
What the hell? Can't you do this another time? And you, don't film me or I'll report you.
It directly confronts people with the climate catastrophe at that moment. And of course, that makes them angry. They're angry that their everyday lives are being disrupted. You get into a lot of discussions and endure a lot of abuse.
You need to get more educated.
It's not about the amount of people, but the distribution of...
There's the same amount of CO2 in the air.
No, there isn't.
You're just a joke to those in Parliament.
My pulse goes up to 180. It's the same with every protest. No matter how often you do it, you never quite feel safe. You just never know if this might be the time when someone just slams their foot on the gas. One of the most painful situations I experienced was when a friend standing right next to me was pushed ahead 200 meters on the hood of a car. The driver in front of me tried to do the same thing with me too. I quickly sat down and put my arms up to slow him down. He was shouting and cheering about what was happening to my friend. We wait until the police come before we glue ourselves to the road. If we do it any sooner, that could be risky, because passers-by and motorists could become violent and might decide to pull us off by force.
Anya is with the Last Generation, an international movement that's been active since 2021. It aims to draw attention to the urgent need for greater climate protections by, among other things, throwing paint at buildings and defacing works of art, but also by supergluing themselves to asphalt and blocking airports and roads.
I'm fundamentally against using illegal methods for political purposes. But in this case, it's particularly bad, because climate change and the fight against it make huge demands on people. The activists are trying to convince the public by reducing their agency, preventing commuters from getting to work, stopping parents from taking their kids to school, sick people from getting to the doctor. By doing this, the public will not accept your position. In my view, quite apart from the fact that the protests and the traffic jams release even more CO2, it won't mean we progress any faster on the climate change issue. On the contrary.
Lasst uns aktiv werden.
Ran an die Arbeit, Arbeit bewältigen, Probleme sind nur dornige Chancen.
Denken wir Growth.
My name's Torsten Alsleben. I'm 52 years old and the CEO of the initiative New Social Market Economy, an economic think tank that's funded by the metal and electrical industry. These are the large and medium-sized metal and electrical companies, the big car makers, for example, automotive suppliers, and Bosch, Siemens, they're all metal industry. I think almost all companies have the issue of climate change on their radar and are doing a lot. Whether it will be enough, that's difficult to say.
Since industrialization took off in the mid-19th century, humans have burned huge volumes of coal, oil, and natural gas, and caused massive deforestation, pumping 2.5 trillion tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere along with other greenhouse gases. This has resulted, among other things, in a rise in global temperatures, the melting of the polar ice caps and glaciers, and more frequent extreme weather events such as droughts, storms, and floods.
So far, the things we predicted many years ago have essentially materialized. And in this respect, if things continue on this trajectory, and signs are that they will, we'll have to reckon with a considerable deterioration of the basis for life on our planet. As one can see, greenhouse gas emissions continue to grow. Although they should be going down, they've even continued to grow after the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, which just goes to show that global politics is unable to combat climate change.
The message I want to get across is that we're in a serious, urgent situation, but at the same time that it's not too late, and that all of us together can still turn things around.
I think in the end it'll only work with facts and convincing arguments. That's always going to be more effective than blocking roads.
There's no doubt that society sees us as obvious scapegoats.
These young people are showing up with moral arguments without having actually accomplished much in life yet. And somehow they're wanting to tell other people what they should and shouldn't do.
Well, some of us in the last generation are 73. They've got 8 grandchildren, and they know precisely why they're doing this. Because they want them to have a future worth living.
We need to be thinking beyond the moment. We all need to learn to do that. We have it so good here, especially in Germany. But elsewhere, how are things there? All the catastrophes. They don't just happen on their own. We need to act. We all live on the same planet, and we all need to fight climate change so we finally start doing something.
memang setiap hari hampir ada.
Almost every day, one of us is arrested and one of my friends taken to the police station.
Kawan-kawan kita, kantor Airut. Ya, pekerjaan saya sih.
My work is hard,
keras ya.
Very hard.
Keras karena pekerjaan saya.
I cut down mangrove trees.
Kayu bakau dan mangrove. Saya Anto Purnomo, umur 38 tahun.
I'm Anto Purnomo. I'm 38, and I work as a day laborer. Thanks to God, I'm married and have 4 children. We live in Uyok, Cintaraja.
Uyok, Cintaraja. Buat saya,
I earn my living via the mangroves. There where I earn money for my wife and children.
Mangrove bagi kami adalah lahan.
That applies to me, but also to my friends, who are illegal loggers as well.
Juga seperti kawan-kawan kami yang pembalak liar nih.
Like the trees in a rainforest, mangroves are particularly important plants for planet Earth. They're home to numerous marine animals and essential for coastal protection. Of the around 147,000 square kilometers that still exist worldwide, most grow in Indonesia and Brazil. In Indonesia, however, an especially large number of mangroves have been destroyed in recent decades, a bitter loss for the stability of the global climate. Per square kilometer, mangroves absorb and store around 4 times as much CO2 as rainforests.
So we're here, and here we'll find dense mangrove forests that are flourishing and that we must protect together.
If we run into loggers, what should we do?
My name is Taufik Hidayat, and I'm 24 years old. Right now, I'm working for Yakopi, a coastal protection organization in Indonesia. I'm active in environmental protection. What I fear most is that the resilience of coastal areas will be eroded by the loss of the mangroves. The local Aceh region has already experienced tsunamis. And what happens when the mangroves are gone and there's another? That's one of my concerns, aside from climate change itself, which is making itself felt everywhere in the form of droughts and heat waves, that it will continue to destroy more and more marine life, something that's having a negative impact on the local economy in coastal regions.
Ekonomi masyarakat juga akan semakin berkurang. Ya, ketika patroli sangat sering kami.
Whenever we're on patrol, we often run into loggers in our area.
Terutama mungkin
their justification is always the same. They're doing it because of their families and their economic situation, which forces them to make a living in this way. And they ask whether their actions really are so destructive.
Ini sebuah perilaku yang memang merusak.
I'm noticing a lack of sensitivity and knowledge regarding the importance of protecting the environment.
I'm aware of the consequences of logging, but I'm doing it because there's no other work. I've got no choice.
Sebenarnya saya sih kepengen punya.
I wish I had my own fishing boat to earn a living, instead of logging mangrove trees.
Ikan atau apapun itu.
Cutting down trees is risky.
Karena kalau dibilang motong kayu,
you can be hit by an axe or bitten by a snake.
Yang kena ular banyaklah. Yang saya alami.
I've been bitten by snakes 17 times already. I'm still alive, thank God.
Alhamdulillah sampai sekarang masih ada.
Dari situ, dengan adanya
Logging all these mangroves means there is fewer sea life and less fish and seafood to find in the water.
dalam ini semakin berkurang. Dan semakin kemarin saya belajar.
And everything I've heard about climate change is also true.
Memang nyata adanya, dan sekarang saya sadar dan harus.
I've realized that I have to do small things and that I can make a difference so that we adapt to climate change ourselves.
Adaptasi terhadap perubahan iklim itu sendiri.
Mit dieser polizeilichen Auflösungsverfügung sind Sie verpflichtet, sich unverzüglich zu entfernen. Kommen Sie dieser jetzt nicht nach, wird unmittelbarer Zwang gegen Sie eingesetzt.
Whenever I've asked myself, why are you doing this right now? It's because we still have room to maneuver. It's not too late, and it won't be too late in 10 years' time either. Because every 1/10 of a degree that the Earth doesn't heat up basically saves human lives. I won't get up voluntarily.
No? I'm going to put my hand under your nose and it's going to hurt, okay?
If someone tells me, for example, it won't be that bad, then of course I try to argue the case using facts. I tell them that the German drinking water supply is also under threat in the long term. Also, that our agricultural model simply won't work anymore, that this will lead to resource scarcity and massive societal upheaval.
We shouldn't be presenting climate change to people as a terrifying spectre. There have already been plenty of surprising innovations that have resulted in a clear improvement afterwards. So maybe we'll find something that sequesters CO2 and stores it much more effectively than today. That would mean we could keep all the coal-fired power plants running because they wouldn't be releasing CO2 into the atmosphere. We don't know yet what's around the corner.
We cannot go on like this. And that's why we block roads, for example, here in Germany in particular. As a nation of the global north that's also affected by climate catastrophes, but nowhere near as dramatically as in nations of the global south. Whenever I disrupt a regular person's journey to work, of course it's annoying. That goes without saying. It feels terrible. We don't enjoy doing it. But it's about explicitly shaking up the normal state of affairs. Because at the end of the day, every individual we encounter is likely to be one of the 10 richest % of the global population, part of the 10 richest % of the global north, responsible for 50% of global emissions. We're all both perpetrators and potentially part of the solution, and that's a responsibility we can't ignore.
In answer to the question of who's responsible for climate change, of course, it's a shared responsibility. But if you look at it globally, several nations in the north are the biggest polluters because of their emissions and their industry.
I do think that the industrialized countries in general bear a special responsibility. They have profited from their CO2 emissions and didn't care much about climate change. I do believe that we have lived at the expense of the climate.
For a long time, industrialized countries such as the US, Russia, and the nations of Europe have emitted the most greenhouse gases. However, the largest annual emissions now come from China, while India, the world's most populous nation, is now in third place. Many of the world's poorer nations, on the African continent for example, contribute the least to climate change, but they're the most heavily impacted by its consequences.
Climate change is the new frontier of social inequalities. A climate change that already happened at the global level has hit poor countries harder than high-income countries. But it's also true within countries, and we also have a lot of evidence of studies of research that shows that the poor are disproportionately affected by the effects of climate change, be it water stress, be it extreme weather events, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods. The other part of the story is that the better off they are, a little more protected, as we've just said, but they actually contribute more. So it's a kind of a mirror inequality, or there's a big asymmetry here. You contribute more to the problem and you are affected less.
What applies to nations applies to individuals too. Whereas the annual carbon footprint per Kenyan is just 500 kilograms on average, in Indonesia, it's around 2.5 tons per person, and almost 8 tons in Germany. However, it's the world's wealthiest people who produce the most greenhouse gases by a large margin, multimillionaires and billionaires.
Of course, I'm angry about the fact that Germany is one of the countries that so far has emitted 4 to 5 times more greenhouse gases than Indonesia. Indonesia is a developing country, but we're severely impacted by the effects of greenhouse gas emissions in the global north.
Those who are more powerful than we are, where are they? Do we see them? No, they're just exploiting resources. Who's doing more damage, us or them? We're the ones suffering the consequences.
I do struggle with my own guilt. Because I was born in Germany, in the global north, I'm contributing so much more to the problem. Even my own personal lifestyle is many times more destructive than that of a person living in Nigeria, for example.
Warum machen wir das? Weil wir mit einer schreienden Ungerechtigkeit konfrontiert sind. Diejenigen, die immer noch weiter zur Eskalation der Klimakatastrophe beitragen, sind gleichzeitig diejenigen, die es am allerwenigsten ausbaden müssen.
I have internalized the pain and suffering in the world to such an extent that I actually considered taking my own life. I try to live as best I can by not flying, by eating a vegan diet. I don't have a driver's license. I don't own a car. I don't need one. I think a cultural change in values is necessary, that we don't define ourselves by who flew on vacation where, how, and when.
I just don't think that morally shaming people if they take an aeroplane is the right way to go. Because the bottom line is that it won't solve the problem. So this won't help the global climate.
The global north is the biggest culprit. But if we're only looking to assign responsibility for the destruction, then we'll be wasting time pointing the finger. What we need is action.
In order to effectively halt the climate catastrophe, there would need to be global binding agreements that countries actually stick to. At the end of the day, this is a planetary crisis, and we can only solve it together. But you quickly run into the problem of individual countries shirking their responsibility, with countries claiming they're only responsible for 2% of global emissions, or 0.2% even. So they act like we don't need to take action. It's not our responsibility.
We must do something to help protect the climate, but in a way that doesn't jeopardize the country's economic foundation, and that's a delicate balancing act. Germany's industry is very competitive on the world market, which is why we're the best in the world at exporting, or one of the best. This means that exports are vital to our survival, and without them, our economic system and social cohesion would collapse.
What's really jeopardizing the German economy is the climate catastrophe. This will potentially cost us up to 900 billion euros by 2050. If we want to save ourselves, if we also want to save the economy, if we want as few negative changes as possible in the long run, then we need to change as much as possible now, to restructure and offer alternative courses of action. Ideally, this should happen on a global scale.
So there's an emerging economy on its way up that says, we also want to give our people, our young people, prosperity. We want to give them secure jobs. We want to give them opportunities to develop and grow. I think most of these countries just focus on growth and don't pay that much attention to the environmental impact.
We in Indonesia suffer from the effects of climate change. That doesn't mean that Indonesia itself is free of bad actors that cause destruction and damage, though.
Kerusakan-kerusakan yang terjadi.
For many years, Indonesia had done little to contribute to climate change. But over the last 35 years, the country has been burning coal on a massive scale and logging its forests and mangroves. At the same time, Indonesia is increasingly affected by droughts and flooding, and its capital, Jakarta, is sinking at an alarming rate.
I fear that emissions will keep rising in emerging economies, but I can't tell a nation trying to increase life expectancy from 30 to 50 years, yes, that's possible, but only if everything's done in a climate-friendly manner, because that would just be unfair.
Sebetulnya kalau memang berbicara, kita harus maju dulu secara ekonomi baru bisa.
When it comes to the question of whether we need to make economic progress before we tackle climate change,
pandangan saya,
I don't believe that economic growth comes first.
Menunggu ekonomi kita maju. Lantas kalau menunggu ekonomi kita
Because if we wait until we've developed economically before tackling climate change, what will the environment look like then?
Untuk mencapai tujuan ekonomi kita maju.
What's more important, becoming prosperous first or protecting the environment? In my opinion, the environment comes first. If you want to be rich but the environment has been destroyed, then you can't really be rich.
Mungkin yang bisa dilakukan oleh pemerintah sekarang ini untuk
What the current government can perhaps do to strike a balance between the economy and environmental protection is sustainable development,
harus memperhatikan semua aspek,
taking into account all the impacts of economic development and reducing deforestation.
Selain daripada itu, pemerintah juga bisa melakukan.
Apart from that, the government can also move away from fossil fuels to renewables in energy production.
Energi fosil mungkin bisa beralih dengan energi terbarukan.
At the same time, I think it's primarily about giving these countries financial support and the opportunity to focus on renewable energies.
Erneuerbare Energien jetzt beispielsweise zu setzen.
Untuk kita melakukan upaya-upaya untuk
Poverty is indeed a decisive factor in our efforts to combat climate change.
Itu yang menjadi faktor utama. Karena
because if people felt economically secure, they'd certainly stop going into the forests to cut down trees.
The people who are now cutting down forests to earn a living need to be given a different economic incentive.
Satu sih tujuan saya, biar
I only have one goal, that there's a change for us illegal loggers. People shouldn't just say we're destroying something when there's no other way for us to earn a living. We're forced to do this because there's nothing else we can do. We need capital to buy a boat or something else, but we don't have that. We're not rich people.
Kami orang nggak ada, bukan orang kaya.
I think we're collectively stuck in a state of cognitive dissonance. I think people who deny the climate catastrophe have a huge problem recognizing the full scale of what we're dealing with.
Only a small percentage of young people are environmentally aware. Perhaps it's down to the influence of technology that they're almost apathetic towards the environment. They're indifferent to it when we talk to them. They don't want to know anything about it. They have little understanding of nature, and most of them don't care.
I can understand that people don't want to face the reality of the situation, but at the end of the day, we won't get out of this if we all just bury our heads in the sand. If we're aware of how bad the catastrophe will become if we don't pull the emergency brake now, then it's only natural people would get defensive.
The serious consequences of climate change are already noticeable in some regions of the world and will be even more so in the future. But many people don't feel the change yet. What they do feel are the restrictions associated with combating climate change.
The world's biggest energy companies have known for decades that burning fossil fuels releases greenhouse gases that are harmful to the environment. But for years, they concealed what they knew and even supported climate change deniers. Many ordinary people have also long denied climate change and turned a blind eye to its consequences to the environment and other human beings, which continues to this day.
The problem with climate change is that it's a highly complex problem, and there's nothing directly tangible to hold on to. There's no direct visible link between the effect my behavior has and that of any factories and the effects they have on the climate. The human brain finds it quite difficult to process this sort of information. Climate denial in Germany is prevalent among people who've got a lot to lose, who have many privileges, and who are also afraid of losing their status in society.
I think the lack of empathy is actually a huge problem, or rather that people have become numb to it. You see the images over and over again. I do believe that many people are overwhelmed by the constant stream of bad news, and that this is also contributing to the denial. On the other hand, it's important that you feel a certain level of fire under your ass to spur you into action.
Management consultants say if you want to change something, you need a sense of urgency, and that's something many people don't yet have.
When we meet the few young people who do understand the problem, we invite them to join us, and together we do small things that can have a positive impact on climate change. My personal goal is to invite as many young people as possible to be more active and to understand that we really need to make a huge effort to secure a better future.
Upaya-upaya yang harus kita lakukan untuk masa depan yang lebih baik lagi.
If we don't make an effort to improve the situation, our children and grandchildren will suffer the consequences. So we're taking immediate action, even if it's just with small things like planting mangroves and other plants along the coast.
I have hopes for a wonderful future. I truly believe in the good in people, that each person is trying to do what they can with the personal resources they have available, and they're giving their best. I believe there are very few people, if any, who behave in an inherently evil way.
I tend to think optimistically because people are able to react to changed conditions, as the entire history of mankind has shown. It's actually mankind's recipe for success, that people have been able to adapt to new situations.
I can do this hard work until I'm 50 years old, God willing. Then, with these savings, I'd like to open a small store so that I can continue to earn enough money for my family. That would make me happy. For the future, I'd like to be able to live happily with my wife, and for my children to have enough to eat. I'd like for them to go to school, and perhaps even to university. That would be enough for me.